Hi, Michael.
Hey, Charles. How's it going?
It's going quite well. How's it going with you?
Good, good.
Good, good. So today, I thought we would talk a little bit about the philosophy of machine learning.
Ooh, I hate philosophy.
I don't like it much either, although I'm a doctor of philosophy.
Oh, that's very impressive.
Aren't you a doctor of philosophy too?
I am. It's kind of impressive.
It is kind of impressive. So what we wanted to kind of get across today is a little bit about why the class is structured the way it is, what the different parts are, and maybe go a little bit of back and forth about what we think you should be getting out of the course. That seem reasonable?
Sure.
Okay. Well, so first off, by the way, before we get started, I wanted to thank you for coming down to Atlanta and joining me in these beautiful studios.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, no, no. Thank you for coming, Michael.
Thank you for asking me to do the course. This has been a lot of fun.
Oh, the whole point was to be able to do the course with you, Michael. We like each other, and that's one of the things that we want you to want to get across in this class, because we like machine learning. We have a lot of stuff in common, but I'm not sure we completely agree on the most important parts of machine learning and why we do the things that we do.
All right.
So I think people in the outside world, Michael, would claim that you're more theoretical than I am.
In theory.
In theory. And I'm more practical than you are.
Practically.
At least in practice. And hopefully some of that tension will come out in the class. But I think in order to see why that tension works that way, you have to understand what machine learning is. So, Michael.
Right.
What's machine learning?
It's about proving theorems.
No.
No.
I would not say it's about proving theorems.
No.
Although, proving theorems is often important in machine learning.
I agree with that.
Okay.
So we're on the same page.
We're partially on the same page. What is machine learning?
What is machine learning?
Give me a definition.
So it is computational statistics. How's that for a definition?
That is a definition. It is wrong on so many levels. However, a lot of people would agree with that statement. They would say that machine learning is really just applied statistics.
Not applied statistics, computational statistics.
Computationally applied statistics. I don't like that definition. I think that it's a bit too narrow. I think that machine learning is about this broader notion of building artifacts, computational artifacts typically, that learn over time based on experience. And then in particular, it's not just the act of building these artifacts that matter, it's the math behind it, it's the science behind it, it's the engineering behind it, and it's the computing behind it. It's everything that goes into building intelligent artifacts that almost by necessity have to learn over time. You buy that?
Yeah, so you have data, and you do analysis of the data and try to glean things from the data and use various kinds of computational structure to do that. So, computational statistics.
I don't think that's computational statistics. This class is divided into three subclasses, three parts. They are supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. So what do you think supervised learning is?
So I think of supervised learning as being the problem of taking labeled data sets, gleaning information from it so that you can label new data sets.
That's fair. I'd call that function approximation. So here's an example of supervised learning. I'm going to give you an input and an output, and I'm going to give them to you as pairs, and I want you to guess what the function is.
Sure.
Okay? Okay. 1, 1. 2, 4.
Wait, hang on. Is 1 the input and 1 the output?
Yes.
And 2 the input for the output?
Correct.
All right, I think I'm on to you. Go ahead.
3, 9.
Okay.
4, 16.
Nice.
5, 25. 6, 36. 7, 49.
Nice. This is a very hip data set.
It is. What's the function?
It's hip to be squared.
Exactly. Maybe. So if you believe that's true, then tell me if the input is 10, what's the output?
100.
And that's right if it turns out, in fact, that the function is x squared. But the truth is, we have no idea where the function is x squared. Not really.
I have a pretty good idea.
You do?
Well,
where does that idea come from?
It comes from having spoken with you over a long period of time. And plus, you know, math.
And plus math. Well, I'm going to
You can't say I'm wrong.
You're wrong.
You just said I was wrong.
No, you've talked to me for a long time, and plus math. I agree with that.
Okay.
But I'm going to claim that you're making a leap of faith, despite being a scientist, by deciding that the input is 10 and the output is 100.
Sure, I would agree with that.
What's that leap of faith?
Well, I mean, from what you told me, it's still consistent with lots of other mappings from input to output, like 10 gets mapped to 11.
Right, or everything's x squared except 10.
Sure.
Or everything's x squared up to 10.
Right, that would be mean.
That would be mean.
But it's not logically impossible.
Or would it be the median?
Oh.
Thank you very much. I was saving that one up. Well, what you're doing in order to make that work, and what you end up doing in supervised learning and function approximation in general, is you make some fundamental assumptions about the world. Right? You decide that you have a well-behaved function that is consistent with the data that you're getting. And with that, you're able to generalize. And in fact, that is the fundamental problem in machine learning. It is generalization. Now, what's behind all of this, I'm going to claim, Michael, you jump in whenever you disagree, is...
I disagree. Oh, sorry, too soon. Go ahead.
Is bias. And in particular,
Bias.
inductive bias.
Inductive bias.
Right. So all of machine learning, or certainly supervised learning, is about induction as opposed to deduction.
I see. Induction, of course, being the problem of going from examples to a more general rule.
Right. Specifics to generalities. By contrast, deduction is...
Would be the opposite. It would be going from a general rule to specific instances, basically like reasoning.
Right, and in fact, a lot of AI in the beginning was about deductive reasoning, about logic programming, those sorts of things, where you have certain rules and you deduce only those things that follow immediately from those rules. So for example, you'd have something like A implies B, that's a rule in the universe, and then I tell you A. So if you know A implies B is a rule in the universe, and I tell you A, then you also know
that A implies B.
And therefore you can
And A.
infer that
B.
B. You have A implies B, you have A, that implies B,
Okay.
is what we just said.
That's
But
deduction.
That's deduction. But what we just did was not deduction before then when I asked you 1, 1, 2, 4, 3, 9, 4, 16, and so on and so forth.
Right.
We did induction.
That was induction.
Induction is more about, did the sun rise yesterday?
Yes.
Did the sun rise the day before that?
Yes.
Did the sun rise the day before that?
I slept in.
Did the sun rise the day before that?
Yes.
Yes. So the sun has risen every day. Is the sun going to rise tomorrow?
I sure hope so.
We all hope so, and we all act like it does, because if it doesn't, then there are a whole bunch of other things we ought to be doing besides sitting in this studio and having this interview.
I think we should warn the plants.
I don't think the plants are going to care.
They are. They really need sun.
I think we all need sun, Michael.
Yeah.
So the idea there is induction is crucial, and the inductive bias is crucial. We'll talk about all this in the course.
Okay.
But that's kind of a fundamental notion behind supervised learning and machine learning in general.
I agree with that, yeah.
All right, so we're on the same page. So that's supervised learning. Supervised learning, you can talk about it in these high muckety-muck ways, but at the end of the day, it's function approximation. It's figuring out how to take a bunch of training examples and come in with some function that generalizes beyond the data that you've seen.
So why wouldn't you call it function induction then?
Because someone said supervised learning first. Well, there is
No, sorry. You said supervised learning is function approximation, and I want to say, why don't you say supervised learning is function induction?
As opposed to function approximation?
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Approximate function induction.
or induction of approximate
Functions.
something like that. Yeah.
You don't want to induce an approximate function. You want to induce the actual function.
Yeah, but sometimes you can't,
Yeah.
because sometimes you think it's quadratic, but it's not.
I have that as a plaque on my wall.
You do?
No.
Yeah, I didn't think so. Okay, so that's supervised learning. What about unsupervised learning?
Right. So unsupervised learning, we don't get those examples. We have just essentially something like inputs, and we have to derive some structure from them just by looking at the relationship between the inputs themselves.
Right. So give me an example of that.
So when you're studying different kinds of animals, say, even as a kid, you might start to say, oh, there's these animals that all look kind of the same. They're all four-legged. I'm going to call all of them dogs, even if they happen to be horses or cows or whatever. But I have developed, without anyone telling me, this sort of notion that all these belong in the same class, and it's different from things like trees.
Which don't have 4 legs.
Well, some do, but I mean, they both bark, is all I'm saying.
Did I really set you up for that?
Not on purpose.
I'm sorry, I want to apologize to each and every one of you for that, but that was pretty good. Michael is very good at wordplay, which I guess is often unsupervised as well.
No, I get a lot of
You certainly get a lot of feedback.
Yeah, that's right. It's like, please stop doing that.
So if supervised learning is about function approximation, then unsupervised learning is about description. It's about taking a set of data and figuring out how you might divide it up in one way or the other.
Or maybe even summarization. It's not just a description, but it's a shorter description.
Yeah, it's usually a concise,
Compression.
compact description. So I might take a bunch of pixels like I have here and might say male,
Wait. I'm pixels now?
as far as we can tell.
That's fine.
I, however, am not pixels. I know I'm not pixels. I'm pretty sure the rest of you are pixels.
That's right.
So I have a bunch of pixels and I might say male, or I might say female, or I might say dog, or I might say tree. But the point is I don't have a bunch of labels that say dog, tree, male, or female. I just decide that pixels like this belong with pixels like this, as opposed to pixels like something else that I'm pointing to behind it.
Yeah, we're living in a world right now that is devoid of any other objects. Oh, chairs.
Chairs,
We got
right.
chairs.
So these pixels are very different from those pixels because of where they are relative to the other pixels, say. Right? So if you were
I'm not sure that's helping me understand unsupervised learning.
go outside and look at a crowd of people and try to decide how you might divide them up. Maybe you'll divide them up by ethnicity. Maybe you'll divide them up by whether they have purposely shaven their hair in order to mock the bald, or whether they have curly hair. Maybe you'll divide them up by whether they have goatees,
Facial hair.
or whether they have gray hair. There's lots of things that you might do in order
Did you
to
just point at me and say gray hair?
I was pointing and your head happened to be
come
there.
on.
Pixels,
Where's the gray
it's a
hair?
two-dimensional, right there. It's right where your spit curl is.
All right.
Okay, so imagine you're dividing the world up that way. You could divide it up male, female, you can divide it up short, tall, wears hats, doesn't wear hats, all kinds of ways you can divide it up. And no one's telling you the right way to divide it up, at least not directly. That's unsupervised learning. That's description, because now, rather than having to send pixels of everyone or having to do a complete description of this crowd, you can say there were 57 males and 23 females, say. Or there were mostly people with beards, or whatever.
I like summarization for that.
I like summarization for that. It's a nice, concise description. That's unsupervised learning.
Very good. And that's different from supervised learning.
It's different in supervised learning, and it's different in a couple of ways. One way that it's different is all of those ways that we could have divided up the world, in some sense, are all equally good. So I could divide up by sex, or I could divide up by height, or I could divide up by clothing, or whatever, and they're all equally good, absent some other signal later telling you how you should be dividing up the world. But supervised learning directly tells you there's a signal, this is what it ought to be, and that's how you train. And those are very different.
But I could see ways that unsupervised learning could be helpful in the supervised setting, right? So if I do get a nice description and it's the right kind of description, it might help me it might help me do the function approximation better.
Right, so instead of taking pixels as input and then labels like male or female, I could just simply take a summarization of you, like how much hair you have, your relative height to weight, and various things like that that might help me do it. That's right. And by the way, in practice, this turns out to be things like density estimation. We do end up turning it into statistics at the end of the day, often.
It was statistics from the beginning. But when you say density estimation,
Yes.
are you saying I'm stupid?
No.
All right, so what is density estimation?
Well, they'll have to take the class to find out.
I see.
Okay. All right. So that's supervised learning and unsupervised learning. That's pretty good. The last one is reinforcement learning.
Woo!
Now, reinforcement learning is what we both do. So Michael does a little bit of reinforcement learning here and there. You've got how many papers published in reinforcement learning? All of them.
Several. I have several.
The man has like 100 papers of reinforcement learning. So in fact, he wrote with his colleagues the great summary journal article bringing everyone up to date on what reinforcement learning was like back in
112 years ago.
1992.
People are saying, yeah, somebody should write a new one because the other one's getting a little long in the tooth.
But there have been books written on machine learning since then.
That's right.
It's a very popular field. It's why we're both in it. Michael tends to prove a lot of things.
That is not why I'm in it.
Why? Wait, what?
You said it's a very popular field, and that's why we're in it.
No. Did I say that?
That's what I heard.
I didn't mean to say that. It is a very
Let's run it
popular.
back and
Yeah,
see.
let's do that again because I did not mean to say that. It is a very popular field. Perhaps because you're in it, Michael.
I don't think that's it. When I was an undergraduate, I thought the thing that I really want to understand, I liked AI, I liked the whole idea of AI, but what I really want to understand is how can you learn to be better from experience? And like I built a tic-tac-toe playing program, and I want this tic-tac-toe playing program to get really good at tic-tac-toe. Because I was always interested in the most practical, society impacting problems.
Tic-tac-toe generalizes pretty well to world hunger.
Eventually. So so that was what got me interested in it, and I didn't even know what it was called for a long time. So I started doing reinforcement learning and then discovered that it was interesting and popular.
Right, well I certainly wouldn't suggest that we're doing the science that we're doing because it's popular. We're doing it because we're interested in it.
Yes.
And I'm interested in reinforcement learning because in some sense it kind of encapsulates all the things I happen to care about. So I come from a sort of general AI background, and I care about modeling people. I care about building smart agents that have to live in a world with other smart agents, thousands of them, hundreds of thousands of them, some of whom might be human, and I have to build some way to predict what to do over time. So from a sort of technical point of view, if we can think of supervised learning as function approximation and unsupervised learning as concise, compact description, what's the difference between something like reinforcement learning and those two, supervised learning in particular?
So often the way that reinforcement learning is described is as learning from delayed reward. So instead of the feedback that you get in supervised learning, which is, here's what you should do, and the feedback that you get in unsupervised learning, which is, the feedback in reinforcement learning may come several steps after the decisions that you've actually made.
So a good example of that, or an easy example of that would be actually your tic-tac-toe program, right? So you do something in tic-tac-toe, you put an X in the center, and then you put, let's say, an O over here.
Ooh.
And then I put an X right here.
Nice.
And then you ridiculously put an O in the center, which allows me to put an X over here, and I win.
All right.
Now, what's interesting about that is I didn't tell you what happened until the very end when I said X wins.
Right, and now I know I made a mistake somewhere along the way, but I don't know exactly where. May have to kind of roll back the game in my mind and eventually figure out where it is that I went off track and what it is I did wrong.
And in the full generality of reinforcement learning, you may have never made a mistake. It may simply be that that's the way games go, but you would like to know which of the moves you made matter. Now, if it were a supervised learning problem, I would have put the X here, he would have put the O there, and would have been told, that's good. I would have put the X here, and then when you put the O there, it would have been, that's bad. The O goes here. Or something like that. It would have told him where he should have put the O. But here, all he gets is eventually some kind of signal saying, you did something well, you did something poorly. And even then, it's only relative to the other signals that you might have gotten.
Right, so then reinforcement learning is in some sense harder because nobody's telling you what to do. You have to work it out on your own.
Yeah, it's like playing a game without knowing any of the rules. Or at least knowing how you win or lose. But being told every once in a while that you've won or you've lost. Okay. Now,
sometimes I feel like that.
I know, man. Okay, so we've got these three little bits of machine learning here, and there are a lot of tools and techniques that are inside that. And I think that's great, and we're going to be trying to teach you a lot of those tools and techniques and sort of ways to connect them together. So by the way, as Michael was pointing out, there are kind of ways that these things might help each other. Unsupervised learning might help supervised learning, but it's actually much deeper than that. It turns out even though unsupervised learning is clearly not the same as supervised learning at the level we've described it, in some ways they're exactly the same thing. It's supervised learning, you have some bias. Oh, it's a quadratic function, induction makes sense, all these kind of assumptions you make. And in unsupervised learning, I told you that we don't know whether this cluster is better than this cluster, dividing by sex is better than dividing by height or hair color or whatever. But ultimately, you make some decision about how to cluster, and that means implicitly there's some assumed signal. There's some assumed set of labels that you think make sense. Oh, I think things that look alike should somehow be clustered together, or things that are near one another should be clustered together. So in some ways, it's still kind of like supervised learning. You can certainly turn any supervised learning problem into an unsupervised learning problem. Right? So in fact, all of these problems are really the same kind of problem.
Yeah, well, there's two things that I'd want to add to that. One is that in some sense, in many cases, you can formulate all these different problems as some form of optimization. In supervised learning, you want something that labels data well. And so the thing you're trying to optimize is find me a function that does that. We're going to score it. In reinforcement learning, we're trying to find a behavior that scores well. And in unsupervised learning, we usually have to make up some kind of a criterion, and then we find a way of clustering the data or organizing the data so that it scores well. So that was the first point I wanted to make. The other one is, if you divide things by sex and you're a virgin, then there's numerical instability issues.
Did you learn about that on the street?
I learned it in a math book.
Yes, you. I'm going to move on with it. So here's the thing.
Right.
Everything Michael just said, except the last part, is true. But there's actually a sort of deeper thing going on here, to me. If you think about the commonalities of everything we've just said, it boils down to one thing. Data. Data, 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 data. Data is king in machine learning. Now, Michael would call himself a computer scientist.
Oh, yeah.
And I would call myself a computationalist.
What?
I'm in a college of computing, not a department of computer science. I believe in computing and computation as being the ultimate thing. So I would call myself a computationalist, and Michael would probably agree with that just to keep this discussion moving.
Let's say.
Right. So we're computationalists. We believe in computing. That's a good thing.
Sure.
Many of our colleagues who do computation tend to think in terms of algorithms. They think in terms of what are the series of steps I need to do in order to solve some problem. Or they might think in terms of theorems. If I try to describe this problem in a particular way, is it solvable implicitly by some algorithm?
Yeah.
And truthfully, machine learning is a lot of that. But the difference between the person who's trying to solve a problem as an AI person or as a computing person and someone who's trying to solve a problem as a machine learning person is that the algorithm stops being central, the data starts being central. And so what I hope you get out of this class, or at least part of the stuff that you do, is understanding that you have to believe the data, you have to do something with the data, you have to be consistent with the data. The algorithms that fall out of all that are algorithms, but they're algorithms that take the data as primary. or at least important.
I'm going to go with co-equal.
So algorithms and data are co-equal.
Co-equal.
Well, if you believe in Lisp, they're the same thing.
Exactly.
All right.
They
so there you
knew
go.
back in the 70s.
So it turns out we do agree on those things.
Whew, that was close.
Excellent. So the rest of the semester will go exactly like this. Michael and I, except you won't see us. You'll see our hands, though.
This side, this side.
You'll see our hands, though. Thank you, Michael.
Side-eye. What?
That was good. That took me back to when I was 4. Okay,
Senior
so...
Wensis. It's called Senior Wensis.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
I
okay.
remember that.
Yeah.
I'm not that much younger than you are. 10, 12 years old.
Oh, come on.
You count gray hairs. Anyway, the point is, the rest of the semester will go like this. We will talk about supervised learning and a whole series of algorithms, step back a little bit and talk about the theory behind them, and try to connect theory of machine learning with theory of computing notions, or at least that kind of basic idea. What does it mean to be a hard problem versus an easier problem? We'll move into randomized optimization and unsupervised learning, where we will talk about all the issues that we brought up here and try to connect them back to some of the things that we did in the section on supervised learning. And then finally, we will spend our time on reinforcement learning and a generalization of these traditional reinforcement learning, which involves multiple agents. So we'll talk about a little bit of game theory, which Michael loves to talk about, I love to talk about, and the applications of all the stuff that we've been learning to solving problems of how to actually act in the world, how to build that robot to do something, or build that agent to play a game, or to teach you how to do whatever you need to be taught how to do. But at the end of the day, we're going to teach you how to think about data, how to think about algorithms, and how to build artifacts that you know will learn.
Let's do this thing.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you, Michael.
Sure.
I will see you next time we're in the same place at the same time.